Why every school in America is locking down in the sleepy town of Willowdale. A series of inexplicable events began to unfold at the local high school, events that would soon ripple across the nation. The story begins on a seemingly normal Monday morning as students of Willowdale High School streamed through the gates, their chatter filling the crisp fall air. However, an undercurrent of tension was palpable, originating from a disturbing incident the previous week when a group of students claimed to have seen ghostly figures in the school's old gymnasium. Emily Sanders, a junior and editor of the school newspaper, was particularly intrigued by these claims. Driven by curiosity and her investigative nature, she decided to delve deeper into the mystery. Accompanied by her best friend, Lucas, they sneaked into the gym late one evening. What they found was beyond anything they had expected. As they flicked on their flashlights, the beam caught a series of ancient symbols scrawled across the floor. Before they could investigate further, a chilling scream echoed through the building, sending them fleeing in terror. The next day, Emily shared her experience with Mr. Hawkins, the school librarian who was known for his knowledge of local history and folklore. Intrigued, Mr. Hawkins revealed that the school was built on the grounds of what was once a boarding school in the 1800s, known for its strict and cruel headmaster who mysteriously disappeared after a series of fatal accidents befell the students. Convinced that these past events were connected to the current hauntings, Emily and Lucas began to research the old boarding school. Their investigation led them to an old diary in the town archive, belonging to Sarah Whitmore, a student from the boarding school era. The diary entries were disturbing, filled with tales of harsh punishments and eerie occurrences, many of which centered around the gymnasium, the same place Emily and Lucas had encountered the ghostly figures. Meanwhile, across the country, similar incidents began to surface in other schools, each built on sites with dark histories. Media outlets picked up on the story, and soon it became clear that a pattern was emerging. As panic spread, schools nationwide started to lock down, with Willowdale High at the epicenter of the crisis. In an effort to find answers, Emily and Lucas contacted a noted paranormal expert, Dr. Elena Martinez, who agreed to visit Willowdale. With her equipment and expertise, Dr. Martinez conducted a night-long vigil in the gymnasium. The session was intense, with numerous manifestations and poltergeist activities. Just as Dr. Martinez began to decipher the ancient symbols, suggesting they were a form of curse meant to protect a secret buried beneath the school, the equipment began to malfunction, and a shadowy figure appeared, warning them to leave. Ignoring the warning, Emily and Lucas decided to dig deeper, literally. They started excavating beneath the gym floor. As they dug, they uncovered an old, locked chest. Just as they were about to open it, a series of loud bangs shook the school, and the ground beneath them began to crack. Fearing for their safety, they had no choice but to evacuate. As they left, the shadowy figure appeared again, its face briefly illuminated by the moonlight. Emily gasped in recognition. It bore a striking resemblance to the headmaster from Sarah Whitmore's diary. The figure pointed towards the chest, mouthing a single word, "Beware." With the school now deemed unsafe, the authorities sealed it off. The chest remained unopened, its secrets buried once more. News of the closure spread, fueling more fear and speculation across the country. Determined to uncover the truth, Emily vowed to continue her investigation. But as she dug through more historical archives, she found a warning scribbled in the margin of an old map of Willowdale: the past isn't buried. It's sleeping. And we are its dream. The story ends as Emily, her expression one of grim determination, steps into the public library to meet with a historian who claims to have new information about the headmaster and the curse. As the door shuts behind her, the screen fades to black, leaving the audience hanging on the edge of their seats, wondering what secrets the historian holds. Why every school in America is locking down continued. In the dimly lit corner of the public library, Emily waited nervously to meet with the historian who claimed to have crucial information about the cursed headmaster. Her fingers tapped impatiently on the wooden table, echoing slightly in the quiet room filled with the musty smell of old books. The clock ticked ominously, each second stretching longer than the last. Finally, a frail old man approached, his steps slow but deliberate. He introduced himself as Mr. Albert Crowley, a retired history professor who had spent years researching the dark corners of Willowdale's past. His eyes, though clouded with age, sparkled with an intensity that spoke of secrets too heavy for one soul to bear. "Thank you for meeting me, Miss Sanders," he began, his voice a whisper of leaves. "What you've stumbled upon is not just local folklore, it's a catastrophe waiting to awaken." The headmaster, Jonathan Whitley, was not just a disciplinarian, he was a practitioner of the dark arts, obsessed with immortality. Emily leaned in, her recorder capturing every word. "Do you mean he was responsible for the deaths at the old boarding school?" Mr. Crowley nodded solemnly. "Yes, and much more. He believed that the souls of those he sacrificed could be bound to protect him beyond death. The symbols you found are part of an ancient ritual that bound these souls to the school grounds, creating a nexus of spiritual energy." As he spoke, Emily felt a chill run down her spine, the air around them seeming to grow colder. Mr. Crowley pulled out an old, tattered map of the town. It showed various landmarks, but several spots were marked with red crosses. "These," he pointed, "are sites where similar occurrences have been documented over the past century. All these buildings have one thing in common: they were built over locations that Whitley used for his rituals." The implications were terrifying, and Emily struggled to keep her composure. "So, what does this mean for us now? How do we stop it?" "The chest you found," Mr. Crowley said, "it likely contains Whitley's grimoire, a book of his spells and perhaps instructions on how to undo the curse. But be warned, retrieving it will not be easy. The spirits will guard it fiercely." Determined to see this through, Emily asked for his help. Together, they planned to re-enter the school, recover the grimoire, and find a way to break the curse once and for all. Their preparation took days, gathering materials and information, while across the country, the phenomena at schools worsened, each incident more violent than the last. Finally, equipped with protective charms and salt circles, old but potent defenses against spirits, Emily and Mr. Crowley, along with a reluctant Lucas, entered the sealed-off school under the cover of night. The building moaned under the weight of its own silence, the air thick with the scent of decay. Their flashlights cut through the darkness as they made their way to the gymnasium. The ground beneath the gym floor was now exposed, the chest sitting at its center, ominously untouched since their last visit. As they approached, the temperature dropped, their breath visible in the icy air. Suddenly, shadows flickered at the edges of their vision, and a low, menacing growl echoed through the room. The protective circles flared up as ghostly figures assaulted their barriers, their faces twisted in agony and rage. Emily, heart pounding in her chest, reached for the chest, her fingers brushing against the cold metal. Just as she flipped the latch, a powerful force knocked her back, sending her sprawling to the ground. The air was filled with the screams of the damned, overwhelming their senses. Lucas and Mr. Crowley dragged Emily to her feet, retreating as the spirits swarmed around them. They barely escaped, the sounds of the tormented dead ringing in their ears as they fled the building. Outside, the night sky seemed darker than before, the stars obscured by a creeping mist that had begun to settle over Willowdale. Breathing heavily, Emily looked back at the school, her resolve hardened. "We can't give up now," she declared, the others nodding in agreement. "We have to find another way." As they retreated into the night, planning their next move, the ground where the chest lay began to crack further, a dark energy seeping from the fissures. The story paused here, with the fate of Willowdale, and possibly the entire country, hanging in the balance, the darkness growing ever stronger as the cursed headmaster's legacy continued to haunt the living. Why every school in America is locking down escalation in the days that followed their harrowing escape from the school, Emily, Lucas, and Mr. Crowley regrouped to formulate a new plan. The darkness that had begun to seep from the school's foundations seemed to spread, as if feeding on the fear and chaos it spawned. Reports of disturbances, not just in schools but throughout Willowdale, began to flood the local police station. Shadows that moved of their own accord, whispers in empty rooms, and electronics malfunctioning were just the beginning. Despite the escalating supernatural activity, Emily was more determined than ever to find a solution. She spent hours with Mr. Crowley, poring over ancient texts and occult references, looking for anything that might help them understand how to break Whitley's curse. Lucas, although skeptical and frightened, supported her, driven by loyalty and the unnerving experiences he'd faced. One evening, as they delved into a particularly old leather-bound book, Emily came across a reference to a ritual that seemed promising. It spoke of a reversal of binding, a ritual that could potentially undo spells binding spirits to a physical location. However, the ritual required an object of personal significance to the spellcaster, which they realized must be the grimoire locked within the chest at the school. Armed with this new knowledge, they knew they needed more help. Emily reached out to Dr. Martinez, the paranormal expert who had first helped them in the school. She agreed to join them, intrigued and concerned by the developments. Together, they planned a more strategic approach, equipped with more sophisticated equipment, including EMF detectors, thermal cameras, and a drone to provide an aerial view of the school's interior before they entered. The night of their return to the school was cloaked in a dense fog, the air charged with electricity. The drone buzzed overhead, transmitting eerie images of the gymnasium back to their monitors. The chest was still there, seemingly untouched, but the shadows around it swirled in an unnatural, hypnotic pattern. Taking a deep breath, they entered the building, each step forward met with increasing resistance, as if the air itself was trying to push them back. The gymnasium doors groaned as they pushed them open, revealing the chaos within. The protective circles they had left behind were now smudged and partially erased, ineffective against the spirits that roamed the area. With Dr. Martinez leading, they began to set up new circles, this time using a more potent mixture of salt and ash. The air crackled with static as the shadows grew denser, the moans of the trapped spirits growing louder. Using the ritual from the book as a guide, Emily began to chant, her voice steady despite the fear that clenched her heart. The chest began to shake, the lid rattling as if something inside was trying to escape. Suddenly, a loud snap echoed through the room, the lock on the chest broke. Before they could react, the lid flew open, and a rush of wind blasted out, extinguishing their lights and plunging them into darkness. In the pitch black, they scrambled to relight their lanterns, their ears filled with the sound of whispers and cries for help that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. When the light returned, they saw the grimoire lying open on the floor, its pages flipping as if caught in a breeze, although the air was deathly still. Dr. Martinez quickly grabbed the book, her hands trembling as she scanned the pages. "There's a counterspell here," she shouted over the din, "but it requires a sacrifice." "What kind of sacrifice?" Lucas yelled back, his voice filled with panic. "Something that binds the caster to the mortal world, blood," she replied. Without hesitation, Emily pricked her finger with a silver pin, a few drops of blood falling onto the open pages. The air grew heavier, the shadows deepening, and a deafening silence descended for a moment before a blinding light erupted from the book. As their eyes adjusted, they found themselves still standing in the gymnasium, but the atmosphere had changed. The oppressive weight was gone, replaced by a tentative calm. But as they began to breathe easier, a low, sinister laugh echoed through the building, deeper and more terrifying than anything they had heard before. The ground beneath them trembled, cracks appearing in the floor, growing wider and deeper, revealing a dark abyss below. From this abyss, a new form began to emerge, larger and more formidable than the ghostly figures they had encountered before. "This isn't over yet," Dr. Martinez said, her face pale but determined. "Whatever we've done, we've only begun to uncover the depth of Whitley's curse." As they prepared to face this new threat, the story pauses, leaving them on the brink of a deeper darkness, the school's secrets still unfolding, and the true extent of the curse yet to be. Why every school in America is locking down. The abyss beckons. The apparition that emerged from the abyss was unlike anything Emily, Lucas, or Dr. Martinez had encountered before. It towered above them, its form shifting and twisting in the dim light, a grotesque mosaic of all the tormented souls that had been bound to the school grounds. Its eyes, if they could be called that, burned with a baleful glow, casting eerie shadows across the crumbling gymnasium walls. Emily stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as the creature began to speak in a voice that was a chorus of whispers, each syllable dripping with malice. "You dare to unbind what has been bound for centuries," it hissed, the air around it shimmering with dark energy. "The master will not be pleased." Lucas grabbed Emily's arm, pulling her back towards the door, but the creature moved with astonishing speed, blocking their path. Dr. Martinez, quick-thinking as ever, threw a handful of salt towards it. The granules seemed to burn the air before they even touched the creature, which recoiled with a screech that shook the very foundation of the school. "Run!" Dr. Martinez shouted, and this time, they didn't hesitate. They bolted towards the nearest exit, the sound of the creature's fury echoing behind them. Once outside, they didn't stop, running until they reached the safety of Lucas's car, parked a few blocks away. Panting and shaking, they took a moment to regroup. "What was that thing?" Lucas gasped, his face pale under the streetlights. "It's a manifestation of the curse itself," Dr. Martinez explained, her voice tense. "It's not just protecting the grimoire, it's protecting the curse's very essence. Whitley's spirit is likely intertwined with it, drawing power from the souls he's trapped." Emily, still clutching the grimoire, opened it to a marked page. "There's something here about a guardian of the curse, a protector summoned to prevent the curse from being broken. It says the guardian can only be banished by completing the reversal of binding in the presence of the one who cast the original spell." "But Whitley is long gone," Lucas pointed out, his skepticism returning in the face of overwhelming supernatural evidence. "Not necessarily his body," Dr. Martinez mused. "His spirit, or even something as simple as a personal relic, could suffice. We need to find his grave or any remnants of his existence." The trio spent the next few days researching, diving deeper into the town's archives and seeking out the oldest residents for any stories passed down through generations. Their search led them to an old, forgotten cemetery on the outskirts of Willowdale, where the town's founders and earliest settlers were buried. Armed with shovels and flashlights, they arrived at the cemetery as dusk fell, casting long shadows between the weathered tombstones. The air was thick with the scent of moss and decay, the silence broken only by the rustling of leaves in the wind. Emily's flashlight beam landed on a tombstone, partially obscured by ivy, with the name Jonathan Whitley carved into the weathered stone. They approached cautiously, aware of the potential dangers that awaited them. Lucas began to dig, his shovel biting into the soft earth. The job was grim, and the deeper they dug, the heavier the air felt, as if they were slicing through the very fabric of the curse itself. Finally, his shovel clanked against something solid. Wiping the sweat from his brow, he cleared away the remaining dirt, revealing an old, rusted coffin. They pried open the coffin to reveal not a body, but rather an assortment of personal items, a pocket watch, a ring, and a small, leather-bound book. Emily, recognizing the importance of these items, carefully collected them, wrapping them in a cloth. Just as they prepared to leave, the air around them chilled, and a dense fog rolled in, obscuring their vision. The sounds of whispers filled the air, growing louder, more insistent. The creature from the school was back, its form more defined, more terrifying. "This is his domain," Dr. Martinez said, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her. "We need to finish this now. Start the ritual, Emily." In the heart of the cemetery, surrounded by the dead and the creature looming over them, Emily opened the grimoire to the ritual page. She placed Whitley's personal items in front of her, her blood from the previous encounter still staining the pages. She began to chant, each word resonating through the fog, as Lucas and Dr. Martinez formed a protective circle around her. The creature roared, its form flickering as the ritual's power began to take effect. The air vibrated with energy, the ground beneath them why every school in America is locking down the veil of shadows as Emily continued the ritual. The air around them thickened, the fog swirling into vortexes that seemed to pulse with a malevolent life of their own. The ground beneath them trembled, and the whispers grew into cacophonous shouts, as if the very souls bound to the site were protesting their liberation. The guardian of the curse, its form now a towering pillar of swirling shadows and despairing faces, roared in defiance. Its presence was oppressive, a physical weight that sought to crush their resolve. But amidst the chaos, Emily's voice remained clear and unwavering, her words slicing through the tumult like a beacon of hope. Lucas, though terrified, stood his ground, holding the protective circle with Dr. Martinez. They sprinkled a mixture of salt and ash continuously, reinforcing the barrier that flickered like flame under the onslaught of the dark entity. Dr. Martinez chanted her own counterspells, her expertise in the paranormal acting as a shield against the dark energies at play. The ritual required not just the chanting but a physical connection to the past, a bridge from the present to the curse's origin. Emily took Whitley's pocket watch in one hand and his ring in the other, feeling the cold metal warm to her touch, as if reacting to the incantations. The items began to glow faintly, casting eerie lights on the pages of the grimoire, which fluttered as though caught in a storm. As the ritual neared its climax, the ground cracked open around the gravesite, revealing glimpses of a dark abyss below. From this abyss, spectral hands and faces emerged, reaching towards the night sky, yearning for release. The air was filled with the scent of earth and decay, but beneath it lay a hint of freedom, a clean scent like that of rain on dry soil, signaling the nearing end of their torment. Suddenly, the guardian let out a shriek that split the air, a sound so filled with pain and rage that it momentarily stilled the hearts of those present. It lunged forward, breaking through the protective circle with a force that sent Lucas and Dr. Martinez sprawling to the ground. Emily, though shaken, held her ground, continuing the chant with a desperate fervor. The personal items of Whitley, the watch and the ring, now radiated a blinding light that enveloped her in a protective sphere. The guardian recoiled, its form beginning to disintegrate under the intensity of the light. "Keep going!" Dr. Martinez shouted, scrambling to her feet and pulling Lucas up with her. They rushed to reinforce the circle, throwing down more salt and ash with shaking hands. The ritual's words seemed to resonate with the very air, vibrating through the ground and into the roots of the world. Emily's voice grew louder, more commanding, as she reached the final lines of the incantation. With a final, emphatic declaration, she slammed the grimoire shut, and the pocket watch and ring exploded in a shower of sparks. The explosion of light was blinding, consuming the guardian in its fiery embrace. The screams and cries of the trapped souls reached a crescendo before beginning to fade, their sounds diminishing like the end of a terrible storm. Slowly, the light receded, revealing a changed landscape. The cracks in the earth closed, the fog lifted, and for the first time in hours, the stars were visible in the clear night sky. Breathing heavily, the trio looked around in awe. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by a calm serenity. But as they began to relax, a low hum filled the air, a sound unfamiliar yet unmistakably ominous. Lucas pointed towards the horizon, where a strange glow began to form. "What now?" he asked, his voice a mix of exhaustion and fear. Dr. Martinez looked toward the glowing horizon, her expression grim. This was never just about one school or one town. Whitley's curse was a part of something larger, something we might have just unleashed. Emily picked up the grimoire, its cover still warm from the ritual. "Then we keep going," she said determinedly. "We find out what we've unleashed and how to stop it." As they prepared to leave the cemetery, a chill wind picked up, whispering secrets of old, urging them on their new journey. Behind them, the grave of Jonathan Whitley lay silent, a dark chapter closed, yet the book of horrors remained open, pages fluttering in the wind, waiting for new tales to be written. In the distance, the strange glow grew brighter, casting long shadows that seemed to beckon them forward. The night was far from over, and their fight against the darkness had only just begun. As they walked towards the car, their silhouettes bathed in the eerie light, the story paused, leaving their fate and the fate of the world hanging in a why every school in America is locking down into the abyss. As Emily, Lucas, and Dr. Martinez drove toward the glowing horizon, the atmosphere thickened with an anticipatory silence. The car's headlights barely cut through the fog that had settled over the landscape like a suffocating blanket. Emily clutched the grimoire tightly, feeling its residual warmth as if it pulsed with a life of its own. The closer they got to the source of the glow, the more the environment changed. Trees along the road were bent and twisted, their branches reaching out like desperate, gnarled hands, and the air was filled with a low, droning buzz that seemed to seep into their very bones. Lucas kept his eyes fixed on the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. "Do you think we did the right thing back there?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was the only thing we could do," Dr. Martinez replied, her gaze fixed on the glowing horizon. "But the true test is what comes next." The glow led them to a small, isolated town that seemed untouched by time. The buildings were old, their woodwork intricate and shadowed. But it wasn't the architecture that caught their attention, it was the absence of people. The town was eerily silent, devoid of movement, as if it had been abruptly deserted. They parked the car at the town square, where the glow was brightest. The source was not a lamp or fire, but rather an ethereal light emanating from a crack in the earth at the center of the square. The crack pulsed with a malevolent energy, casting unsettling shadows that danced on the old cobblestones. "Looks like we found the heart of it," Emily said, stepping out of the car. The grimoire in her hands felt heavier with each step she took towards the crack. As they approached, the air grew colder, and the low drone turned into a chorus of whispers, voices begging for help, others cursing them. The light from the crack threw their long shadows behind them, twisting their forms into monstrous shapes. Lucas pointed to the grimoire. "Is there anything in there about sealing this thing?" Before Emily could respond, the ground trembled violently under their feet, knocking them off balance. The crack widened, and from it emerged a host of spectral figures, their faces twisted in agony and despair, reaching out towards the living. Dr. Martinez, quick to react, started chanting a protective spell, her words cutting through the clamor of the ghostly horde. Emily joined in, her voice syncing with Dr. Martinez's in a powerful duet that seemed to calm the spirits momentarily. Lucas, though lacking in knowledge of the paranormal, threw the salt they had brought in a wide arc around them, forming a temporary barrier. The spirits hissed at the barrier, their forms flickering at the edges of the salt line. "We need to seal it now," Dr. Martinez shouted over the howl of the wind that had begun to whip around them. "Emily, the book!" Emily flipped through the grimoire, her fingers trembling as she searched for anything that could help. Finally, she found a sealing ritual, but it required a sacrifice, a life for a life. The words chilled her to the bone. "I'll do it," Lucas said suddenly, his voice firm. "This started with us, maybe it should end with one of us too." "No!" Emily protested, tears welling up in her eyes. "There has to be another way." But Lucas was already walking towards the crack, his decision made. "It's okay, Em. It's the only way to make sure this ends here." Emily and Dr. Martinez watched, helpless, as Lucas stepped closer to the glowing abyss. He turned back, giving them a reassuring smile. "Take care of each other," he said before turning back to face the crack. With a deep breath, Lucas jumped into the light, his body consumed by the glow. The spectral figures screamed, a sound so piercing it seemed to split the sky. Then, suddenly, the light imploded, sucking everything back into the crack, which began to close slowly, sealing itself with a final, resonant thud. The town square was silent once more, the only sound the soft crying of Emily as she fell to her knees. Dr. Martinez put an arm around her, offering what comfort she could. As they stood there, the first hints of dawn began to touch the sky, the night's horrors fading like a bad dream. But for Emily, the loss of Lucas was a wound that would never fully heal. They had stopped the curse, but at a cost that was too great to bear alone. The story ends with Emily picking up the grimoire, now just a book of memories, as she and Dr. Martinez walk back to their car, leaving the silent town behind. The